Hello, folks, and welcome to the second half of our unit on cell communication in the cell cycle. In this part of the unit, we're going to talk about the cell cycle specifically, but before we get to that, want to take a little time out and talk about feedback. It's an important thing for all living things, is how do we adjust to changing environments around us and within us. So we use feedback mechanisms for that. So let's get into that. And that's part 1, 4.5, feedback. Good feedback is essential, remember. So feedback mechanisms help to maintain the internal conditions at a relatively stable level for many animals. We call that homeostasis, and plants and other organisms. By relatively stable, we mean that it's not perfect. You're not always 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for your body temperature, right? It's going to go up a little bit, down a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. It doesn't have to stay exactly at that point, but it should stay within a range. If you get too high, bad things happen. If you get too low, bad things happen. You want to kind of stay in that middle range. Okay. So faced with those environmental fluctuations, animals, and we're going to focus mainly on animals in this unit, manage their internal environment by either regulating or conforming to the environment around them. So a regulator uses internal control mechanisms to control the internal change in the face of external fluctuation. Think warm-blooded animals, right? It doesn't matter if it's cold outside or hot outside. We maintain our temperature like humans, 98.7 Fahrenheit. Other animals will maintain it at whatever temperature is optimal for them. On the other hand, an example of a conformer would be a cold-blooded organism, like this frog. Its body temperature is going to depend greatly on the temperature outside. You say it was snakes, right? So when it starts getting cold out, they go and sun themselves on the rock to try to warm up to increase their metabolism, because their metabolism drops when it gets colder, it goes up when it gets warmer. Animals may regulate some environmental variables while conforming to others. There's some things we don't worry about, some things we do. Here we can just see this in graph form. We got our warm-blooded otter and our cold-blooded largemouth bass. We got the environmental temperature down here and the body temperature here. So for a river otter, warm-blooded, as environmental temperature goes up, it stays relatively constant. It's going to go up a little bit. I mean, we don't have perfect regulation, but the largemouth bass, it's practically 1-to-1. For every degree you go up in environment temperature, the body temperature goes up a degree as well. Now, the term homeostasis means steady state or internal balance regardless of the external environment. We use humans, for example, with body temperature, blood pH, glucose concentration, and a whole bunch of other things are each maintained at a relatively constant level. In order to do that, we got to have mechanisms that help to moderate the changes in our internal environment. Okay, because the external environment is going to try to push us hotter, push us colder, whatever, and we have to work against that to keep ourselves in that narrow band where everything works properly. Okay. So for a given variable, fluctuations above or below that set point, so you got this, let's keep using temperature, set point of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, if our body temperature starts to rise above that range that we set that's okay, all of a sudden, that stimulus is going to trigger a response. We're going to have a sensor, temperature sensor, something like that. It's going to trigger a response that will bring our temperature back down. Or if we got too low, trigger a response that brings our temperature back up. Think sweating or shivering, right? To do both of those things. And that response returns the variable to the set point. A classic example is a home heating system. Right here in the middle, you got room temperature set at 20 degrees Celsius. That's your set point. Let's say it's a warm day. The sun's coming in through the windows. Room temperature increases. The thermostat shuts off the heater, and then the temperature starts to fall back down. Or at the other hand, if your temperature starts to get too low, temperature is decreasing, we turn on the heater to bring the temperature back up. This is what's called a double feedback loop, because you have one response if it gets too hot and another response if it gets too cold. And that's how most feedback mechanisms are set up. They're double loops. You got one thing that happens if you get above the set point and another thing that happens if you get below the set point. This one here in particular is known as a double negative feedback loop. So let's talk about that. Homeostasis in animals relies largely on negative feedback, which helps to return a variable to the normal range. This is most things in us, temperature, blood pH, for example. If your here's your set point, right? If your temperature starts to get above it, what do? We try to reverse that motion. Our temperature is getting too high, our body's working to knock that back down into the normal range. That's a negative. It's working against the change to try to keep us steady. Or if our temperature starts dropping too low, our body works to knock it back up. Okay, so we're working in an opposite direction. And that's why we call it negative feedback. Not negative as in bad, negative as in we're going the opposite direction to try to return things back to that midpoint of homeostasis where we are functioning efficiently. Positive feedback, on the other hand, amplifies the stimulus. Okay. It doesn't usually contribute to homeostasis in animals. There's only a few things that we use it for. Some prime examples are like blood clotting. Okay, you get a cut. You want to get that clot closed as quickly as possible. So the cells that are cut release a hormone PGI 2 or 3. Can't remember, PGI 2, which brings in more platelets, which release more of the chemical, which causes even more platelets to come in to clot the wound, which brings in relief even more chemicals, let's bring in more platelets. So each reaction ramps up the one before it, and we just get faster and faster, stronger and stronger. Same thing with like birth, right? You've all seen it in the movies. If you haven't experienced it yourself, watching somebody go through labor and delivery, right? You start off with a small little cramp. Okay. Ooh, maybe the baby's coming. Maybe we should go to the hospital. Just a few seconds. The next one comes like 20, 30 minutes later. But each time you get that small cramp, the muscles in the uterus are releasing a hormone, oxytocin, which will cause the next contraction. The more oxytocin you have, the stronger and faster the contractions come. So you release a little hormone. That means the next set of contractions are going to be a little stronger and a little longer, which is going to release even more hormone, which will cause the next contractions to be stronger and longer, releasing more hormone, stronger, longer, more hormone, stronger, longer. Baby, right? It's ramping it up. And that's a positive feedback loop. We don't see that a lot, but where we do see it's pretty important, where you want to get something to ramp up quickly. But there's usually a shut-off mechanism for those. Otherwise, it can go out of control. Okay, so most things are negative. Bring it back to the midpoint. A few things are positive where it just knocks it up and makes it go fast. So we'll take a break here and watch this little mini video on negative feedback.
This simple animation illustrates the principle of negative feedback, or feedback inhibition, in the regulation of a chemical reaction sequence in a cell. The sequence involves 4 molecules, A, B, C, and D. 3 different enzymes catalyze the conversion of one molecule to the next. The final product, D, inhibits the first enzyme in the sequence. When the concentration of D rises to a certain point, the reaction shuts itself down.
All right, and here we'll do one that illustrates positive feedback so you can see the difference.
In positive feedback, a product of the reaction sequence enhances the action of one of the enzymes, increasing the rate of production of the product. Positive feedback is less common than negative feedback in living systems.
So, is homeostasis always the same all the time for every organism? No. There are set points in normal ranges, like we talked about, like 98.6 and a slight range above and below that where things still work pretty well. But those set points in normal ranges can change over the course, cyclically, over the course of a day, over the course of a month, over the course of your lifetime. For example, the circadian rhythm, that 24-hour cycle that animals go through on Earth, because we have a 24-hour day approximately. So we can see here, like body temperature is higher during the day and then it drops at night, where melatonin levels go in the other direction. So this is not, steady body temperature all the time or steady melatonin level all the time. It needs to change so we can regulate things that need to happen at different times. Okay. It's not anti-homeostasis. It's just homeostasis ranges need to change to accommodate different things we want to have happen. And we can see down here, if you want to take a look, you can see what's happening and with other things as we go around our 24-hour clock. Another example would be puberty, hormone balances. What was a normal range when you were prepubescent in elementary school is not normal range when you start going through adolescence and puberty, which is also not the same as what you get when you're an adult. So those levels have to change. Those set points have to change to help you develop and grow. We can also alter homeostasis a little bit. We can adjust to changes in the external environment, a process called acclimatization. You may have seen this with mountain climbers, right? As we go up in altitude, all right, we breathe faster to get more oxygen. The oxygen concentrations drop. So in order to get the amount of oxygen we need, we got to start breathing faster. When we breathe faster, that results in more carbon dioxide building up in the blood, increasing blood pH. Okay. Eventually, it takes a little bit of time, but eventually your kidneys will shift to start regulating the buffer in our blood. We have a carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system in our blood that helps to maintain blood pH and works off of carbon dioxide levels. Um, so we're climatized to our normal level of oxygen and breathing rate, right, at whatever level we're used to living at. If we move to a higher elevation, it'll take a little bit of time, but eventually the kidneys will adjust and start getting rid of more or less of the bicarbonate ion in the case of this one, which will help regulate blood pH given the changes in external environment. So we can change that. It does take time. We can't change everything. Okay, we're not going to acclimatize and be able to live with a lower body temperature, for instance. Our proteins and stuff would denature, but we can do it in some situations. All right, I hope that helped, guys. Check in with you next time when we start talking about the cell cycle. So long.